The auctioneer's gavel hit the podium with a sharp crack. Rebecca Sterling Brooks, 8 months pregnant and guided by her faithful companion Luna, had no idea she was about to become the center of a viral video that would change everything. Put the creature on a leash where it belongs, the woman's voice cut through the charity auction like a blade. The words weren't random cruelty, they were calculated destruction. What Rebecca didn't know was that the woman humiliating her in front of hundreds of people knew exactly who she was. The blind, pregnant woman, being called a creature, wasn't just some random target. She was the secret daughter of a $12 billion tech empire, and someone was willing to destroy her publicly to steal that inheritance. But here's what Victoria Chase didn't count on. Some people get stronger when you try to break them. Some people turn humiliation into power. And some people discover that being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. This is the story of how a woman called a creature became the creator of her own destiny, how public humiliation became private empowerment, and how the cruelest moment of one woman's life sparked a movement that would change millions of others. You think you know how this story ends. You don't. The auctioneer's gavel echoed through the marble ballroom like a gunshot. Rebecca Brooks shifted in her seat, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant and already exhausted, she wondered why she had let David convince her to attend the Hartwell Foundation charity auction. "You need to get out more," David had said that morning, adjusting his tie in their modest apartment's mirror. "Fresh air, different scenery." "A charity auction isn't exactly fresh air," Rebecca had replied, but she had agreed anyway. Her guide dog Luna lay at her feet now, a steady presence in the overwhelming cacophony of clinking glasses and hushed conversations. The ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and privilege. Rebecca could hear the rustle of silk gowns and the soft thud of designer heels against polished marble. These were not her people. She belonged in classrooms with her husband David, grading papers and planning lessons. Not here among the wealthy elite of the city. "Lot 47, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the vast space. "A weekend getaway at the Sterling Estate Vineyard. Bidding starts at $1,000. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Sterling, her maiden name. The vineyard her father had once promised would be hers someday. Before everything fell apart. Before he decided a blind 6-year-old daughter was too much of a burden to hear. "That's your family's old place," David whispered beside her. His voice carried a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Was," Rebecca corrected quietly. "It was our place, a long time ago." A woman's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Clear, confident, cruel. $5,000, the voice announced. Rebecca could hear the click of expensive heels as the woman stood. "Though I do hope the accommodations are better than what some people are used to these days." Laughter rippled through the crowd, not kind laughter, the sort that excluded rather than included. A man's voice joined the first woman's. Deep and authoritative, it carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Perhaps we should clarify what type of clientele this particular lot attracts," the man said into a microphone. "We want to maintain certain standards at our charitable events." The room fell silent. Rebecca could feel hundreds of eyes turning in her direction. Luna whined softly, sensing her owner's sudden tension. "Is that woman even supposed to be here?" someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Look at that dog," another voice added. "This isn't a pet-friendly venue." "Someone's service animal just growled," came a third voice, dripping with disdain. Rebecca's face burned with embarrassment. She started to stand, ready to leave with whatever dignity she had left. David's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "We don't have to go anywhere," he said firmly. "You have every right to be here." But the woman who had bid on the vineyard wasn't finished. Her heels clicked against the marble as she moved closer to the microphone. "Auctioneer," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent ballroom. "I think there's been some sort of mistake here tonight." The auctioneer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ma'am, if you could please return to your seat." "This is a charity auction for worthy causes," the woman continued, her voice growing louder and more theatrical. "Not a petting zoo for strays." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Rebecca felt as though she had been slapped. Luna pressed closer to her legs, sensing the hostility in the room. David started to rise from his chair, but Rebecca gripped his arm with surprising strength. Don't, she whispered. Please don't make this worse. The woman wasn't finished. Her voice carried a note of performance now, as though she were putting on a show for the crowd. I mean, really, she continued with exaggerated disbelief. Next, we'll be letting in actual strays off the street. At least put the creature on a leash where it belongs. The room erupted. Some people laughed uncomfortably. Others gasped in shock. A few voices rose in protest, but they were quickly drowned out by the chaos. Rebecca's world tilted. The words hit her like physical blows. Creature. Leash. The casual cruelty of it took her breath away. The man's voice boomed over the microphone again. Security should escort this disruption out immediately, he announced. This is a private event for respectable members of society. Rebecca stood slowly, her legs shaking. Luna rose beside her, pressing against her owner's leg for support. The guide dog's training kept her silent, but Rebecca could feel the tension in the animal's body. Come, Luna, Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. We're leaving. As she made her way toward the exit, the woman's voice followed her like a poison arrow. Some people simply don't know their place in the world, the woman called out. Breeding more disappointments, no doubt. The words struck Rebecca in the chest like a physical blow. Her water broke. The warm fluid ran down her legs as she stood frozen in the aisle. Panic flooded through her as she realized what was happening. 8 months. Too early. The stress, the humiliation, the cruelty. It was too much. Rebecca! David's voice cut through the chaos as he reached her side. What's wrong? My water, she gasped. The baby. It's too early. The ballroom erupted into a different kind of chaos now. People rushed forward to help. Others backed away as though pregnancy might be contagious. The woman who had orchestrated the humiliation fell silent, but Rebecca could still feel her presence like a dark cloud. Call an ambulance, David shouted to no one in particular. My wife is in labor. As Rebecca doubled over with the first contraction, she caught a fragment of conversation from near the auction podium. Is she going to have that baby right here? On the marble floor? How absolutely mortifying. Luna whined and pressed closer to Rebecca's legs. The guide dog was trained for many situations, but not this one. It's okay, girl, Rebecca whispered through gritted teeth. It's going to be okay. But as another contraction hit and she heard the distant wail of sirens, Rebecca wondered if anything would ever be okay again. The cruelty she had experienced tonight felt personal in a way she couldn't understand. These people didn't know her. So why had they targeted her with such vicious precision? The last thing she heard before the paramedics arrived was the woman's voice again, quieter now but still audible. Well, the woman said to her companion, that certainly wasn't on tonight's program. Cold laughter followed the words as Rebecca was helped onto a stretcher. Luna trotted alongside, her training keeping her calm despite the chaos around them. As the ambulance doors closed and they pulled away from the Hartwell Foundation building, Rebecca pressed her hand to her belly and tried to push away the echo of those cruel words. Creature, leash, breeding disappointments. Who was that woman? And why had her words felt like they were designed specifically to destroy Rebecca's world? The questions followed her into the sterile brightness of the hospital, where machines would soon confirm what she already knew in her heart. This night had changed everything, not just because of the early labor, but because someone had looked at her and seen something worth destroying. Rebecca just didn't know why. The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Rebecca lay on the narrow hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around her. The contractions had stopped, but the damage was done. Her blood pressure remained dangerously high, and the stress had triggered what Dr. Martinez called false labor. The good news is that the baby is fine, Dr. Martinez explained, his voice gentle but serious. The contractions have stopped completely, but we need to keep you overnight for observation. David paced beside the bed like a caged animal. His usually calm demeanor had cracked during the ambulance ride, and now he looked ready to punch something. This is insane, he muttered for the 10th time. You were invited to that auction. Your name was on the guest list. My maiden name, Rebecca corrected quietly. She stared at the ceiling tiles, trying to process what had happened. Sterling, I used my maiden name when I bought the tickets. Why would someone target you like that? David asked. Those people acted like they knew you. Before Rebecca could answer, the emergency room doors burst open. Sarah Mitchell rushed in, still wearing her dog training uniform from the kennel where she worked. Her face was flushed, and her eyes were wide with panic. Becca, Sarah called, rushing to the bedside. I came as soon as David called. Are you okay? Is the baby okay? We're fine, Rebecca said, though she didn't feel fine. She felt exposed and vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since childhood. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Becca, there's something you need to know. Someone recorded what happened tonight. Recorded what? David's voice was sharp. Sarah's face went pale. The whole thing. The woman calling you a creature. The humiliation. Everything. She paused, looking sick. It's online. The video is everywhere. Rebecca felt the world tilt again. What do you mean everywhere? YouTube, Facebook, TikTok. Someone posted it with the caption, "Pregnant blind woman put in her place at high society auction." Sarah's voice broke. It has over 2 million views already. The monitors around Rebecca's bed began beeping faster as her heart rate spiked. 2 million people had watched her humiliation. 2 million strangers had seen her called a creature and told she belonged on a leash. I want to see it, Rebecca said quietly. Becca, no, David said immediately. You don't need to put yourself through that. I need to know what people are seeing, Rebecca insisted. I need to know what they're saying about me. Sarah hesitated, then activated her phone's screen reader. The mechanized voice filled the small hospital room as it read comments from the video. That poor woman. What kind of monsters talk to a pregnant person like that? She showed incredible dignity under those circumstances. Someone needs to identify those people and make them face consequences. But then the tone of the comments shifted. She probably was trying to scam rich people for money. Why was she even there if she couldn't afford to belong? Some people need to know their place in society. Stop, Rebecca whispered. Please stop reading them. Sarah quickly turned off the phone. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the monitors. There are good comments too, Sarah said quickly. Lots of people are defending you. They're calling you brave. Brave? Rebecca laughed bitterly. I didn't do anything brave. I just stood there and took it. You maintained your dignity, David said firmly. That woman tried to break you down in front of hundreds of people, and you didn't let her. Dr. Martinez knocked on the doorframe. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have the test results. Mrs. Brooks, your blood pressure is still elevated? I want to keep you here for at least 24 hours. As the doctor left, Rebecca turned towards Sarah's voice. You said someone posted this video. Do we know who? Not yet, Sarah replied, but people are trying to figure out who that woman was. They're calling her Auction Karen online. Despite everything, Rebecca almost smiled at that. Auction Karen? The internet can be cruel, but it can also be justice, Sarah said. People are furious about what happened to you. Rebecca's phone began buzzing with notifications, text messages, social media mentions, friend requests from strangers. The digital world had discovered her existence, and she wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. I just want to go home, Rebecca said quietly. I want to forget this ever happened. But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't possible. The video was out there forever. 2 million people, and counting, had watched her most humiliating moment. There was no going back to her quiet life of teaching and preparing for the baby. David sat on the edge of the hospital bed and took her hand. We'll get through this, he said. Together. Rebecca squeezed his hand but said nothing. She was thinking about the vineyard lot at the auction. Sterling Estate, the property that had once belonged to her family before her father sold everything and disappeared from her life. David, she said suddenly, that vineyard lot tonight, Sterling Estate. Do you remember the name of the seller? David frowned, thinking. I think the auctioneer said it was donated by Sterling Technologies. Why? Sterling Technologies, Rebecca repeated. The name sent a chill down her spine. That's my father's company. The room went quiet again. Your father? Sarah asked carefully. Rebecca rarely talked about her family. Eleanor Sterling, Rebecca whispered. He founded Sterling Technologies after my mother died, after he gave me up. David stared at her. The tech billionaire Eleanor Sterling? That's your father? Rebecca nodded slowly. He said he couldn't handle raising a disabled child. I was 6 when he put me in foster care. Becca, Sarah breathed. If he donated that vineyard to the auction tonight, that means, that means he knew I might be there, Rebecca finished. The invitation came to Rebecca Sterling. He would have seen the guest list. A terrible possibility began forming in Rebecca's mind. What if tonight's humiliation wasn't random? What if someone had known exactly who she was? Her phone rang. Unknown number. Against David's protests, Rebecca answered. Mrs. Brooks? The voice was elderly, male, and carefully controlled. This is James Whitmore. I'm an attorney representing Eleanor Sterling. We need to talk. Rebecca's blood ran cold. About what? About the video from tonight, about your father, and about why Victoria Chase targeted you so specifically. Victoria Chase? The woman who humiliated you tonight, Mrs. Brooks. She knows exactly who you are. And what happened tonight wasn't random cruelty. It was calculated destruction. The phone slipped from Rebecca's numb fingers. David caught it and continued the conversation. But Rebecca couldn't hear the words anymore. The beeping of the monitors faded into background noise as a terrible understanding washed over her. Someone had looked at the guest list for tonight's auction. Someone had seen Rebecca Sterling's anthem and recognized it. Someone had orchestrated her public humiliation with surgical precision. But why? Back in their modest apartment the next evening, Rebecca sat in her favorite reading corner. Luna lay at her feet while her fingers moved across the raised dots of a braille document she'd never shown David. The papers felt brittle beneath her fingertips, yellowed with age and secrets. What are those? David asked from the doorway. His voice was gentle but curious. Rebecca paused in her reading. Legal documents. My foster mother gave them to me when I turned 18. Her voice was steady but cold. She said my father left them for me. I never opened them before. The papers rustled as she set them aside and reached for her laptop. The screen reader software activated with soft chime. Why now? David settled into the chair across from her. Because I need to understand who my father really is, Rebecca said, and why Victoria Chase knows who I am. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The screen reader began its mechanical recitation. Eleanor Sterling, net worth $12 billion. Sterling Technologies. Founded in 1995 after the death of his wife, Margaret Sterling, and the relinquishment of his disabled daughter to state care. The computerized voice delivered the facts without emotion, but each word hit Rebecca like a small explosion. Relinquishment, she repeated, her voice bitter. Like I was a defective product he was returning to the store. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Becca. No, it's fine, Rebecca said, though her hands were shaking slightly. I always knew the basic facts. Mother died in a car accident. Father couldn't cope with a blind child. End of story. But the screen reader continued. Sterling Technologies specializes in assistive technology and accessibility software. The company's mission statement reads, to create a world where disability never limits possibility. Rebecca's laugh was sharp and humorless. How noble. He builds technology to help disabled people after throwing away his own disabled daughter. She continued typing, pulling up article after article about her father's business empire. The screen reader painted a picture of a man devoted to accessibility, to helping people like her live fuller lives. It was a cruel irony that left her feeling sick. Sterling Technologies has donated over $100 million to disability advocacy organizations. The computer voice continued. Founder Eleanor Sterling has been quoted as saying his greatest regret was not doing enough to help disabled individuals integrate into society. His greatest regret, Rebecca whispered, not abandoning his daughter, not enough charitable donations. Her phone rang, interrupting her spiral of bitterness. James Whitmore's number appeared on the caller ID. Mrs. Brooks, the attorney's voice was grave. Have you had time to consider our conversation? I'm considering a lot of things, Mr. Whitmore, Rebecca replied. Like why my father's lawyer is calling me 22 years too late. Because he's been looking for you for 5 years, Mrs. Brooks. ever since his cancer diagnosis. The words hit like ice water. Cancer? Pancreatic. He has perhaps 6 months remaining. James paused. He hired private investigators to find you, but you changed your name when you married, moved to a different state. The trail went cold multiple times. Rebecca's hand moved protectively to her belly. So what changed? How did Victoria Chase find me when his investigators couldn't? That's what we need to discuss in person. There are things about last night that you need to understand. David leaned forward. What kind of things? The kind that explain why Mrs. Chase knew exactly who Rebecca was and why she chose to destroy her reputation before Mr. Sterling could locate her. An hour later, they sat in James Whitmore's downtown office. The elderly attorney moved with careful precision, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. Luna lay quietly beside Rebecca's chair, sensing the tension in the room. Your father began searching for you 5 years ago, James began. The cancer diagnosis made him realize he was running out of time to make amends. Amends? Rebecca's voice was sharp. 22 years of silence, and now he wants to make amends? He knows he made a terrible mistake, James said quietly. The grief after your mother's death, the fear of raising a disappointed child alone, the media attention around the accident, he handled everything wrong. So he threw me away. Yes, and he's regretted it every day since. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. You said Victoria Chase knew who I was. How? James pulled out a thick folder. Marcus Wellington, Victoria's partner, owns Wellington Industries. They supply components for Sterling Technologies. It's a $50 million annual contract. David leaned forward. What does that have to do with Rebecca? Marcus has been pressuring your father to sell Sterling Technologies for 2 years, James explained. The company is worth approximately $12 billion, but your father has been resistant to selling. Because of me, Rebecca said quietly. Because you're his sole heir, James confirmed. If something happens to him, Sterling Technologies goes to you. Victoria discovered the private investigation to find you 6 months ago. Understanding dawned slowly. She realized that if he found me, he'd never sell the company. Exactly. The company would eventually belong to you. Marcus and Victoria's acquisition plans would be ruined. Rebecca felt sick. So she decided to destroy me before he could find me. We believe she intended to create a public scandal that would make your father ashamed to claim you as his daughter, James said. She counted on you being too humiliated to come forward, even if you discovered the connection. David's voice was tight with anger. How did she know Rebecca would be at the auction? The guest list. Man. Rebecca bought tickets under her maiden name, Sterling. Victoria would have recognized it immediately. Rebecca sat back in her chair, trying to process the magnitude of the deception. She orchestrated the entire thing. The bidding on the vineyard, the cruel comments, the public humiliation. All of it was calculated. Yes. But she didn't count on someone recording it, David said. James nodded. The video actually worked in our favor. It provides evidence of her behavior and intent. Rebecca's phone buzzed with another notification. The video now had over 5 million views. Comments ranged from supportive to cruel, but the story was spreading far beyond what anyone had anticipated. There's something else, James said quietly. Your father wants to see you, no strings attached, no legal obligations. He just wants to apologize. Rebecca was quiet for a long time. Luna shifted at her feet, sensing her owner's emotional turmoil. Where she finally asked. His office. Tomorrow, if you're willing. Rebecca thought about the man who had given her up, who had built an empire helping people like her while ignoring his own daughter. She thought about Victoria Chase's calculated cruelty and the video that had exposed her humiliation to millions of strangers. Most of all, she thought about the baby growing inside her, the child who would never know what it felt like to be abandoned by a parent. I'll see him, she said quietly. But not for him, for me. I need answers. As they prepared to leave James's office, Rebecca asked one final question. Mr. Whitmore, when my father dies, what happens to Sterling Technologies? It becomes yours, Mrs. Brooks, all of it. The company, the assets, the responsibility. Rebecca was quiet during the drive home. David glanced at her frequently, but didn't push for conversation. Luna sat alertly in the back seat, her training keeping her calm despite the emotional undercurrents in the car. $12 billion, Rebecca finally said. That's a lot of zeros, David agreed. I've been living paycheck to paycheck my entire adult life. And now I'm potentially inheriting one of the largest tech companies in the country. How does that make you feel? Rebecca considered the question. Angry, confused, terrified. She paused, and maybe a little bit powerful. That night, Rebecca lay awake listening to David's steady breathing beside her. Her laptop sat open on the nightstand, screen reader software reading article under article about Sterling Technologies, about her father's business philosophy, about the accessibility technology that had helped millions of people, technology that could have helped her if she'd had access to it growing up. Instead, she'd learned to navigate the world through trial and error, through the kindness of foster families and her own stubborn determination. She'd put herself through college, learned to teach, built a life on her own terms. And now, through a cruel twist of fate and Victoria Chase's calculated malice, she was about to inherit everything her father had built. The question was, what would she do with it? The Sterling Technologies building stretched 40 stories into the gray morning sky. Rebecca stood on the sidewalk outside, Luna beside her, trying to steel herself for the conversation ahead. David's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." Rebecca's voice was steadier than she felt. "I need to understand who he is, and who I am." The lobby smelled of expensive marble and corporate power. Rebecca could hear the click of heels on polished floors, the quiet hum of elevators, the murmur of business conversations. This was her father's world, a world built after he'd discarded her. James Whitmore met them at the security desk. "Eleanor is waiting in his office," the attorney said. "He's nervous." "Good, Rebecca replied. "He should be." The elevator ride to the 40th floor passed in silence. Rebecca's hand rested on her belly, drawing strength from the life growing inside her. Whatever happened in the next hour, her child would never doubt their worth the way she had. Eleanor Sterling's office occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city below, though Rebecca could only experience them through the change in air pressure and the subtle shift in ambient sound. "Rebecca," her father's voice broke on her name. She heard him stand from behind his desk, but he didn't approach. Smart man. She wasn't ready for physical contact. "Mr. Sterling," she replied formally. Luna settled at her feet, a warm presence in the vast, cold space. "Please sit," Eleanor said. "Both of you." Rebecca remained standing. "I'm fine here." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. 22 years of absence filled the air with unspoken words and abandoned love. "You look," Eleanor began, then stopped. "You look like your mother." "So I've been told." Another silence. Rebecca could hear her father's breathing, slightly labored. The cancer, she realized. He was dying, and part of her felt nothing at all about that fact. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," Eleanor said finally. "You're right. You don't. I was weak. After Margaret died, I couldn't. I looked at you and saw her death. My failure to protect her. My inability to be the father you needed." Rebecca's voice was ice. "So you made me pay for your grief?" "Yes." The simple admission hung in the air between them. "I've lived 22 years believing I was too broken to be loved by my own father," Rebecca said. "Do you understand what that does to a child?" "I'm beginning to," Eleanor whispered. "Are you?" Rebecca's voice rose slightly. "Because you built a company dedicated to helping disabled people while your disabled daughter grew up in foster care. You donated millions to accessibility causes while your own child learned to navigate the world alone." "You're right. I know I'm right." Rebecca took a step forward. "But that's not why I'm here." "Why are you here?" "Because someone tried to destroy me 2 nights ago, and I want to know why." Eleanor's breathing changed. Rebecca could hear him moving, probably returning to his chair. "Victoria Chase," he said quietly. "Yes, James told me about the business connection, but I want to hear it from you." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Marcus Wellington has been pressuring me to sell Sterling Technologies for 2 years. The company is worth approximately $12 billion. And you don't want to sell?" No, I built this company as a monument to your mother's memory and as a way to help people he stopped. Like me, Rebecca finished. People like your abandoned daughter? Yes. David spoke for the first time. Arthur, what changed Marcus's approach? Why did Victoria get involved? Because I told Marcus I was looking for my daughter, Eleanor said quietly. I mentioned that Sterling Technologies would go to her when I died. He realized that finding you would complicate his acquisition plans. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. So Victoria decided to eliminate the complication. We believe so. If she could humiliate you publicly, create a scandal around your name, she thought I'd be too ashamed to claim you. Even if you did find me, Rebecca continued the logic, I'd be too damaged to want anything to do with you or the company. Yes. Rebecca began pacing, Luna automatically adjusting to follow her movement. She miscalculated, Rebecca said. How so? Rebecca stopped and turned toward her father's voice. She assumed I'd be broken by public humiliation, that I'd slink away and disappear. You didn't. No, I got angry instead. For the first time since entering the office, Eleanor laughed. It was a broken sound, but genuine. You always were stubborn, he said softly, even as a little girl. The words hit Rebecca unexpectedly. A flash of memory, sitting in her father's lap while he read to her, her small hands exploring the textures of his face. She pushed the memory away. Tell me about Victoria Chase, she said. Marcus's business partner and mistress, Eleanor replied. She discovered our investigation to find you about 6 months ago. She realized you were a threat to their acquisition plans. How? She hired a private investigator to monitor your social media presence. She knew exactly who would be at that auction and when. David leaned forward. So the whole thing was planned. Every word, Eleanor confirmed. She chose her language carefully. Creature. Leash. And she wanted to humiliate you as thoroughly as possible. Rebecca felt sick. The cruelty had been so personal, so vicious. Now she understood why. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, Eleanor said quietly. On me? You're my heir, Rebecca. Sterling Technologies will belong to you when I die. You can sell it to Marcus and Victoria if you choose. You can dissolve it. You can run it yourself. The choice is yours. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. How long do you have? She asked. 6 months, maybe less. And if I choose to have nothing to do with you or the company, then my lawyers will respect your wishes. You'll still inherit everything legally, but you won't have to deal with me personally. Rebecca considered this. 6 months. Her baby would be born in 1 month. Her father would likely live long enough to meet his grandchild, if she allowed it. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor spoke again. Rebecca, the video from the auction. It's been seen by over 8 million people now. Rebecca nodded. I'm aware. Some of those people are employees of Sterling Technologies. They're asking questions about what happened to you, about why someone would target you so viciously. What are you telling them? The truth, that you're my daughter, that Victoria Chase orchestrated your humiliation to serve her own business interests. Rebecca felt a flutter of something that might have been satisfaction. How is that playing with your employees? They're furious, Eleanor said quietly. We're a company built on accessibility and inclusion. What happened to you goes against everything we stand for. Good. As they waited for the elevator, James Whitmore approached with a worried expression. Rebecca, we have a problem. What now? Marcus Wellington is claiming the auction incident was a misunderstanding. He's threatening to sue for defamation if we proceed with legal action. Rebecca almost smiled. Let him sue. There's more. Victoria Chase has announced she's pregnant. She's claiming that stress from the online backlash caused complications with her pregnancy. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Is she actually pregnant? Rebecca asked as they stepped inside. James shook his head. Our investigators don't believe so, but she's using the claim to paint herself as a victim of internet harassment. Rebecca was quiet during the descent to the lobby. Victoria Chase was playing the victim card, trying to flip the narrative. It was a smart move, but it wouldn't work. Mr. Whitmore, Rebecca said as they reached the ground floor. I want you to arrange a meeting. With your father? No, with Victoria Chase and Marcus Wellington. All of us together. David looked at her in surprise. Becca, are you sure? I'm sure. It's time to stop letting other people control my story. As they walked out into the afternoon sunlight, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not the helpless kind that came from being pitied or protected, but the real kind. The kind that came from choosing your own battles. Victoria Chase had made a critical error. She'd assumed that humiliating Rebecca would break her. Instead, it had awakened something much more dangerous. Rebecca's determination to fight back. Rebecca's modest apartment felt smaller after seeing her father's corporate empire. She sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed documents that David had read aloud and transcribed into Braille for her. Luna lay at her feet, sensing the tension that had been building for days. The Wellington Industries financial reports, David said, settling into the chair across from her. James was right. They're heavily leveraged. If they don't acquire Sterling Technologies, they could face bankruptcy within 2 years. Rebecca's fingers traced the Braille dots as she absorbed the information. So this isn't just about business ambition, it's about survival. It gets worse, David continued. Victoria Chase owns 30% of Wellington Industries. If the company fails, she loses everything. Which explains why she was willing to orchestrate such a vicious attack, Rebecca said quietly. She was fighting for her financial life. The irony wasn't lost on her. Victoria had tried to destroy Rebecca to save herself, but the video of that destruction was now being used as evidence of calculated malice. The cruelty that was supposed to eliminate Rebecca as a threat had instead made her untouchable. Her phone rang. Sarah's number appeared on the caller ID. Becca, have you seen the latest developments? Sarah's voice was excited. Which developments? Someone tracked down Victoria Chase's social media history. She's posted dozens of discriminatory comments about disabled people over the years. The internet is tearing her apart. Rebecca felt a grim satisfaction. What kind of comments? Really awful stuff. Complaints about wheelchair accessibility requirements, jokes about blind people, comments about how disabled people are a burden on society. Sarah paused. It's creating a pattern that supports what happened at the auction. And Marcus Wellington? His company's stock price has dropped 15% since the video went viral. Apparently, investors don't like being associated with disability discrimination. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. The internet's justice was swift and merciless, but it was also chaotic. She needed something more controlled, more definitive. Sarah, I need you to do something for me, she said. None anything. Help me organize a meeting. Disability rights advocates, parents of disabled children, people who saw the video and want to help. I want to channel this anger into something productive. Like what? Like making sure this never happens to anyone else. 2 days later, the community center meeting room buzzed with conversation. Rebecca had expected maybe a dozen people. Instead, over 50 filled the folding chairs, with more standing along the walls. Sarah had helped her position herself at the front of the room, and Luna lay calmly beside her chair. My name is Rebecca Brooks, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. Most of you know me as the pregnant, blind woman from the auction video. Murmurs of support rippled through the crowd. What you might not know is that I'm also Rebecca Sterling, daughter of Eleanor Sterling, heir to Sterling Technologies. The room fell completely silent. Rebecca had debated whether to reveal this information, but James Whitmore had convinced her it was necessary. Victoria Chase had played dirty. Rebecca needed to show her cards if she wanted to win. I didn't ask for this inheritance, she continued. I didn't ask for the power that comes with it, but I have it. The question is, what do I do with it? A woman near the front raised her hand. Make them pay. All of them. Pay how? Rebecca asked. Victoria Chase was cruel, but cruelty isn't illegal. Marcus Wellington was complicit, but complicity isn't a crime. Then what's the point of having power if you can't use it for justice? A man called out from the back. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. The point is change. Real, lasting change. Victoria Chase humiliated me because she thought disabled people were disposable. She thought we'd disappear quietly when threatened. She paused, her hand resting on her belly. She was wrong. We don't disappear, we organize. We build. We create a world where our children don't have to fight the same battles we did. A young woman with cerebral palsy spoke up. What does that look like practically? It looks like using Sterling Technologies to develop better assistive technology, Rebecca said. It looks like funding disability advocacy groups. It looks like changing the conversation from charity to justice. And Victoria Chase? Someone asked. Rebecca smiled for the first time in days. Victoria Chase gets to watch everything she tried to destroy become more powerful than she ever imagined. The room erupted in applause. After the meeting, as people exchanged contact information and made plans for follow-up actions, Sarah walked with Rebecca to the parking lot. That was incredible, Sarah said. You've turned your humiliation into a movement. I'm terrified, Rebecca admitted. Good. That means it matters. A black sedan pulled up beside them. James Whitmore stepped out, his expression grave. Rebecca, we have a situation. What now? Marcus Wellington called an hour ago. He wants to meet. All parties present. Tomorrow at his office. Rebecca felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with fear. Just like that? There's more. He claims to have information about the auction that we don't. Something that could change the entire situation. David emerged from the community center, having helped clean up after the meeting. What could he possibly tell us that we don't already know? He asked. James shook his head. I don't know, but he sounded different, worried, maybe even scared. Of what? That's what we need to find out. That evening, Rebecca sat in the nursery she and David had been preparing. The baby's room was nearly complete now, crib assembled, clothes washed and folded, books arranged on low shelves. In 1 month, her daughter would be born into a world that Rebecca was only beginning to understand she had the power to shape. Her laptop sat open on the changing table, screen reader software reading the latest news articles about the auction incident. The story had grown beyond a simple viral video into a larger conversation about disability rights, corporate responsibility, and social justice. Sterling Technologies stock rises as investors support accessibility mission, the computer voice read. Wellington Industries faces federal investigation for discrimination practices. Auction video sparks a national conversation about disability inclusion. Rebecca closed the laptop and leaned back in the rocking chair. Luna patted over and rested her head on Rebecca's lap. What do you think, girl? She whispered, stroking the dog's soft fur. Are we ready for whatever Marcus Wellington wants to tell us? Luna's tail thumped against the floor in response. Through the nursery window, Rebecca could hear the sounds of the city settling into evening. Somewhere out there, Victoria Chase was probably planning her next move. Marcus Wellington was preparing for tomorrow's meeting. Eleanor Sterling was working late in his corporate tower, managing the empire he'd built after abandoning his daughter. And Rebecca sat in a modest apartment, pregnant and planning. No longer the victim of other people's cruelty, but the architect of her own justice. Tomorrow she would face the people who had tried to destroy her. But tonight she was exactly where she needed to be. Home with her husband and her guide dog and her unborn daughter, gathering strength for the battles ahead. The woman who had been humiliated at that auction was gone. In her place sat someone new, Rebecca Sterling Brooks, heir to a $12 billion empire and mother to a child who would never know what it felt like to be abandoned. It was time to stop reacting to other people's attacks and start building the world she wanted her daughter to inherit. 3 a.m. Rebecca sat in the nursery, surrounded by the quiet evidence of the life she and David had built together. Tiny clothes hung in the closet. A mobile of soft animals waited above the crib. Books in both print and braille filled the shelves. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind churned with questions that had no easy answers. David found her there, Luna curled at her feet like a furry guardian. Can't sleep? He asked softly, settling into the chair beside her. I keep thinking about tomorrow's meeting, Rebecca said. About what Marcus Wellington might tell us. About what happens after. What specifically are you worried about? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby had been active all evening, responding to her mother's stress with kicks and movement. What kind of world am I bringing this baby into, David? She finally asked. A world where people look at a pregnant woman and see something to destroy? A world where you have the power to change things, David replied gently. Do I, though? Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. Or do I just become another rich person trying to buy their way out of guilt? David reached for her hand. You could walk away from all of it. Mahavim, from your father, from the company, from the inheritance. Just because it's legally yours doesn't mean you have to take it. $12 billion doesn't just disappear, David. It could. You could refuse the inheritance. Let the company go to shareholders or the government. Start fresh. Rebecca considered this. The idea was tempting in its simplicity. Walk away from the complexity and the responsibility. Raise their daughter in their modest apartment. Continue teaching. Live the quiet life they'd planned. And let Victoria Chase win? She asked. This isn't about her anymore. But it? Rebecca turned toward his voice. She counted on me being too ashamed to fight back, too broken to claim my place, too damaged to want power. You don't have anything to prove to anyone, don't I? Rebecca's voice rose slightly. Every disabled person who saw that video, who's been humiliated, who's been treated like they don't belong, don't I owe them something? You don't owe the world your pain, Becca. Maybe not, but I owe myself the choice. Luna stirred at her feet, sensing the tension in the room. Rebecca stood and moved to the window, though she couldn't see the city lights beyond the glass. She could hear traffic in the distance, the pulse of a world that never slept. What if I'm not strong enough, she whispered. What if I can't handle that level of responsibility? What if I make things worse? Then you'll learn, like you've learned everything else. Rebecca's laugh was watery. I learned to read Braille because I had to. I learned to navigate the world because I had to. I learned to love myself because no one else would teach me how. And now? Now I have to learn how to forgive a dying father, how to use power instead of just surviving it, how to be someone's mother when I barely remember having one myself. Her phone buzzed on the changing table. A text from an unknown number. The whole world saw what happened to you. Some of us are watching to see what you do next. Don't let them break you. A friend. Rebecca showed the message to David, who read it aloud. Someone's watching, she said quietly. Lots of people are watching. That video has 15 million views now. 15 million people watched me get called a creature and told I belong on a leash. 15 million people watched you maintain your dignity in the face of cruelty. David corrected. 15 million people saw what real strength looks like. Rebecca moved back to the rocking chair and sat heavily. The baby responded with a strong kick, as if reminding her mother that she wasn't facing this alone. I'm scared, David. Of what specifically? Of becoming like them. Rich and disconnected and cruel. She paused. Of losing myself in all that money and power. You think inheriting wealth automatically makes you a bad person? I think it's easy to lose perspective when you're insulated from consequences. David was quiet for a moment. What does your gut tell you to do? Rebecca considered the question. Beneath the fear and uncertainty, there was something else. Something that had been growing since the auction, feeding on anger and determination. My gut tells me that Victoria Chase made a mistake, she said slowly. She thought humiliating me would eliminate me as a threat. Instead, she gave me a reason to fight. Fight for what? For every person who's been treated like they don't belong. For every child who might grow up thinking they're too broken to be loved. For every woman who has to choose between dignity and security. She stood again, pacing the small room with Luna automatically adjusting to follow her movement. You know what the worst part was, Rebecca said, Beckham. Not the words themselves, but the laughter afterward. The way people joined in like cruelty was entertainment. But not everyone laughed. No, some people were horrified. Some people walked out. Some people filmed it because they knew it was wrong. So there's hope. There's work to be done. Rebecca stopped pacing and faced David. I can't change what happened to me, but I can make sure it means something. Even if it costs you everything? Rebecca thought about their modest life, their simple dreams, the quiet happiness they'd built together. Taking on sterling technologies would change all of that irrevocably. Some things are worth the cost, she said finally. David stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. She could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and reassuring. "Whatever you decide, we'll face it together," he said. "Even if I become someone you don't recognize?" You're the woman who faced down a room full of hostile strangers while 8 months pregnant and never lost her composure. You're the woman who turned public humiliation into a platform for change. I'm not worried about you becoming someone I don't recognize. What if the money changes us? Then we'll set up systems to prevent that. Accountability structures, regular reality checks. We'll stay connected to the community center, to real people with real problems. Rebecca pulled back to look at him, though she couldn't see his face. You're really okay with this? With me potentially becoming a billionaire overnight? I'm okay with you becoming whoever you need to be to sleep at night, David said. Whether that's a billionaire activist or a middle school teacher in our tiny apartment. Rebecca felt some of the tension in her shoulders release. Having David's support didn't eliminate her fears, but it made them manageable. There's something else, she said quietly. What? If I take on Sterling Technologies, our daughter grows up with all that pressure, all that expectation. She'll never have a normal childhood. Define normal. Rebecca almost smiled. Fair point. I don't exactly have a baseline for normal childhoods. Maybe that's an advantage. You know what it feels like to be abandoned, so you'll never abandon her. You know what it feels like to be underestimated, so you'll never underestimate her capabilities. And if she inherits her mother's disability, then she'll have parents who understand exactly what she's facing and the resources to help her thrive. Rebecca felt the baby kick again, stronger this time. She's active tonight, David observed. She's been kicking all evening. I think she's responding to my stress. Or she's telling you to stop overthinking and trust your instincts. Rebecca laughed despite herself. You think an unborn baby is giving me life advice? I think babies are smarter than we give them credit for. As if in response, the baby delivered a particularly strong kick that made Rebecca gasp. Okay, she said to her belly. Message received. Dawn was beginning to lighten the windows when Rebecca finally felt ready to try sleeping again. But first, she had one more thing to do. She opened her laptop and began typing, the screen reader silent as her fingers found the familiar keys. Dear Mr. Wellington, she began, I understand you have information to share tomorrow. I have some information to share as well. Information about what happens when you underestimate someone because of their disability. Information about what happens when cruelty becomes strategy. See you tomorrow, Rebecca Sterling Brooks. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Tomorrow she would walk into that meeting not as a victim seeking justice, but as a woman who had already won simply by refusing to disappear. Victoria Chase had taught her something valuable, though probably not intentionally. The person who controls the narrative controls the outcome, and Rebecca was done letting other people control her story. The Sterling Technologies boardroom was designed to intimidate. Rebecca could feel it the moment she stepped off the elevator. The weight of corporate power, the scent of expensive leather and old money, the hushed reverence that surrounded serious wealth. But she wasn't intimidated anymore. Eleanor sat at the head of the polished conference table, his breathing slightly labored. The cancer was progressing faster than expected. James had warned her. This meeting might be one of the last times her father would be strong enough for such confrontations. Rebecca took the chair to his right, Luna settling beside her with practiced calm. David and James flanked her other side, creating a wall of support that she found both comforting and empowering. Across the table, Marcus Wellington and Victoria Chase sat with their own legal team. Rebecca couldn't see them, but she could hear Victoria's nervous energy in the way she shifted in her chair, the soft rustle of expensive fabric. This meeting is unnecessary, Marcus began without preamble. What happened at the auction was a simple misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media. Eleanor's voice was cold steel. Calling my daughter a creature who belongs on a leash was a misunderstanding? Taken out of context, Victoria said, her voice smooth but strained. Rebecca could hear the performance in it, the calculated attempt at appearing reasonable. I was upset that evening. Pregnancy hormones affect judgment, as I'm sure Rebecca understands. Rebecca spoke for the first time since entering the room. You're not pregnant. The silence that followed was electric. Excuse me? Victoria's carefully controlled voice cracked slightly. You're not pregnant, Rebecca repeated calmly. Your posture is wrong when you walk. Your breathing pattern is wrong when you speak. You're performing pregnancy, not experiencing it. Victoria's lawyer leaned forward. My client's medical condition is not relevant to this conversation, Rebecca continued, cutting him off, because this isn't about pregnancy hormones or social media misunderstandings. This is about a business deal gone wrong. She turned toward Marcus's general location, though she couldn't see him. You needed my father to sell Sterling Technologies. When you discovered he was looking for me, you realized I was a threat to that acquisition. So your partner here decided to eliminate me as a factor. That's a serious accusation, Marcus said, but Rebecca could hear uncertainty in his voice. With serious evidence, James interjected, sliding a folder across the table. Private investigator records showing that Victoria hired surveillance on Rebecca's social media accounts, financial records proving Wellington Industries' desperate need for the Sterling acquisition, and witness statements from the auction. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You targeted my daughter. We targeted a business threat, Victoria snapped, her mask finally slipping. You've been planning to hand over a $12 billion company to someone who can't even see the financial reports. The room erupted in angry voices from both sides of the table. Rebecca stood slowly, and the arguments died away. You're right, she said quietly. I can't see the financial reports. The room went completely silent. But I can hear lies when people tell them. I can smell fear when people are desperate. And I can sense weakness when people attack pregnant women at charity events. She moved around the table toward Victoria's voice with careful, deliberate steps. Luna remained at her original position, trained not to follow unless specifically commanded. You're weak, Victoria. You're so terrified of irrelevance that you orchestrate public humiliations. You're so desperate for control that you fake pregnancies for sympathy. I don't have to listen to this, Victoria said, but she didn't move from her chair. Actually, you do, Rebecca continued, stopping directly in front of Victoria's position. Because I own this room now. I own this company. And I own the power you tried to steal from me. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. You called me a creature. You said I should be on a leash. You suggested I don't know my place in the world. The silence was absolute. You were right about one thing. I don't know my place. Because my place is wherever I choose to be. And right now, I choose to be the person who decides your future. Marcus cleared his throat. Rebecca, perhaps we could discuss a reasonable settlement. I'm not interested in settlements, Rebecca said, still facing Victoria. I'm interested in justice. What does that mean? Victoria asked, her voice barely audible. Rebecca straightened and smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. It means you get to watch everything you tried to destroy become more powerful than you ever imagined. Wellington Industries will lose its contract with Sterling Technologies, effective immediately. Your acquisition plans are dead, and every time someone Googles your name for the rest of your life, they'll find that video of you calling a pregnant woman a creature. She turned back toward the head of the table. But that's not the justice I'm really interested in. What do you mean? Eleanor asked quietly. I mean the Sterling Foundation, which I'm establishing immediately, funded with $1 billion from Sterling Technologies, dedicated to disability advocacy, accessibility technology, and ensuring that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Rebecca moved back to her chair, Luna automatically rising to follow her. I'm also establishing the Eleanor Sterling Institute for Assistive Technology, funded with another $1 billion. Because despite abandoning me, my father did build something meaningful, something that helps people like me. Eleanor's intake of breath was audible. And finally, Rebecca continued, settling back into her chair, I'm establishing the Margaret Sterling Memorial Fund for Children in Foster Care, with particular focus on disabled children who've been abandoned by their families. The room was silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and Eleanor's labored breathing. Marcus tried once more. Rebecca, be reasonable. Wellington Industries employs thousands of people. If we fail, then you should have thought of that before you decided to destroy a pregnant woman for profit, Rebecca said calmly. Your employees can apply for positions at Sterling Technologies if they're qualified. We're about to expand significantly. Victoria finally spoke, her voice hollow. You're destroying us. No, Rebecca corrected. I'm building something better on the ruins of what you tried to tear down. You chose to make this personal when you called me a creature. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. James leaned forward. There is one more matter to discuss. What's that? Marcus asked. The federal investigation into Wellington Industries' discrimination practices. The video from the auction has prompted several former employees to come forward with their own stories. Victoria's face went pale. Rebecca could hear it in the way her breathing changed, became shallow and rapid. You can't prove anything, Victoria said weakly. Actually, we can, Eleanor said, speaking for the first time in several minutes. You see, Victoria, when you hired investigators to monitor my daughter, you forgot something important. What? I hire better investigators than you do. James slid another folder across the table. Recorded phone conversations between Victoria and Marcus discussing their plan to humiliate Rebecca. Email chains detailing the strategy. Financial records showing payments to the person who ensured Rebecca would be seated in a visible location at the auction. The silence stretched until Rebecca could hear Victoria's sharp intake of breath. You set me up, Victoria whispered. No, Eleanor replied. We documented your crimes. There's a difference. Rebecca stood again. This meeting is over. You have 24 hours to remove your belongings from Wellington Industries before the building is seized as part of the federal investigation. You can't do that, Marcus protested. Watch me, Rebecca said simply. As Victoria and Marcus and their legal team filed out of the boardroom in defeat, Rebecca remained seated. Eleanor watched her carefully. How do you feel? He asked quietly. Powerful, Rebecca said, and terrified of that power. Good. The moment you stop being terrified of power is the moment you become dangerous with it. Rebecca nodded. There's something else we need to discuss. What's that? Your granddaughter. She'll be born in 3 weeks. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Would you like me to meet her? Rebecca considered the question. The man who had abandoned her as a child was asking for a chance to know his grandchild. On one condition, she said finally. Anything. You tell her the truth about what you did to me, about your mistakes. She grows up knowing that people can change, but also that actions have consequences. I can do that. Then yes, you can meet your granddaughter. As they prepared to leave the boardroom, James approached with a final update. The video from the auction now has 22 million views, he said, and Sterling Technologies stock is up 30% since the announcement of the foundation. Rebecca smiled. Victoria Chase succeeded in making me famous. She just didn't anticipate what I'd do with that fame. Walking out of the building that would soon be hers, Rebecca felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mantle. She was no longer the woman who had been humiliated at a charity auction. She was Rebecca Sterling Brooks, heir to a $12 billion empire and mother to a child who would grow up knowing that dignity was not negotiable. Victoria Chase had tried to destroy her and had instead created something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The war was over. The rebuilding could begin. 6 weeks later, the same ballroom that had witnessed Rebecca's humiliation was transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables filled with disability advocates, technology leaders, and families who had been touched by the Sterling Foundation's work. The inaugural gala had raised $15 million in a single evening. Rebecca sat at the head table, her 3-week-old daughter Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. David sat beside her, Eleanor on her other side, looking frail but determined. Luna lay at Rebecca's feet, calm despite the crowds and noise. In the back of the ballroom, Victoria Chase and Marcus Wellington sat at the least desirable table. Their business empire had crumbled exactly as Rebecca had predicted. Wellington Industries had declared bankruptcy 2 weeks earlier, and both were facing federal charges for conspiracy and discrimination. But Rebecca had insisted they be invited tonight, not for confrontation, but for education. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca spoke into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the spacious room. 6 weeks ago, I was humiliated in this very ballroom. Tonight, I stand here as president of Sterling Technologies and founder of the Sterling Foundation. Applause filled the space, but Rebecca raised her hand for quiet. This isn't a revenge story, she continued. This is a rebuilding story. Victoria Chase thought she could make me disappear. Instead, she made me visible. She thought she could make me ashamed. Instead, she made me proud. Her hand rested gently on Emma's back as the baby slept. In 3 weeks, I welcome my daughter into this world. She'll grow up knowing that her mother faced cruelty and chose courage, that she faced discrimination and chose dignity. She paused, facing the audience she couldn't see but could feel hanging on every word. Victoria Chase is here tonight. I invited her specifically. Gasps echoed through the room as cameras found Victoria at her back table, her face pale and drawn. Not for confrontation, not for humiliation, but for education. Because the best response to someone who tries to make you small is to become so large they can't ignore your light. Rebecca adjusted Emma slightly as the baby stirred. The Sterling Foundation has already changed lives. Jenny Martinez, age 7, received a revolutionary communication device that allows her to speak for the first time. The Parker family got the home modifications they needed to care for their disabled son. Butterby Shroff Kim's research into assistive technology just received a $10 million grant. The applause was spontaneous and thunderous. But this foundation exists because Victoria Chase chose cruelty over kindness, because Marcus Wellington chose profit over people. Their actions created a moment that sparked a movement. Eleanor leaned into his own microphone. My daughter has taught me that strength isn't about avoiding our broken places. It's about using them to build something better. His voice was weaker than it had been 6 weeks ago, but his words carried the weight of genuine remorse and pride. I failed Rebecca when she was 6 years old. I abandoned her when she needed me most. But she succeeded anyway. She built a life of meaning and purpose without me. Tonight, she's building a future that will help millions of people I could never reach. Rebecca felt tears gathering in her eyes as her father spoke. Forgiveness was still a work in progress, but respect and understanding were growing. The Eleanor Sterling Institute for Assistive Technology, she continued, has already developed 3 breakthrough devices that will be available to anyone who needs them, regardless of their ability to pay. More applause filled the room. And the Margaret Sterling Memorial Fund has placed 200 disabled children in loving homes and provided support services to ensure they thrive. Rebecca stood carefully, still holding Emma. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't charity. This is justice. Disabled people don't need your pity. We need your respect. We don't need to be fixed. We need barriers removed. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. Victoria Chase called me a creature who belonged on a leash. She was wrong about what I am, but she was right about one thing. I am fierce when threatened. I am protective when attacked. And I am absolutely relentless when someone tries to hurt my family or my community. The standing ovation that followed lasted for 3 full minutes. As the applause died down, Rebecca made an unexpected announcement. I have one final piece of news to share tonight. Sterling Technologies has just signed a partnership agreement with the Department of Education to provide assistive technology to every school district in America. Every child, regardless of their family's income, will have access to the tools they need to succeed. The room erupted again, but Rebecca wasn't finished. This partnership is funded by a very special source, the liquidated assets of Wellington Industries, which were seized as part of the federal investigation into discrimination practices. She looked toward the back of the room where Victoria sat in stunned silence. Victoria, your attempt to destroy me is now providing technology to help disabled children across the country. I thought you should know. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Eleanor approached Rebecca where she stood near the windows, Emma still sleeping in her arms. How does it feel? He asked quietly. Different than I expected, Rebecca replied. I thought justice would feel more like winning. Instead, it feels like beginning. Beginning what? Beginning the work that matters. Tonight was about showing people what's possible. Tomorrow is about making it real. Eleanor nodded slowly. I may not live to see everything you accomplish, but you'll see the foundation. You'll know that your mistakes became something meaningful. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but it's what Emma deserves. a grandfather who understands the power of making amends. As they prepared to leave the ballroom where Rebecca's public life had begun, she paused at the exit. Victoria Chase sat alone at her table, abandoned by her attorneys and associates. Rebecca made a decision that surprised even herself. She walked over to Victoria's table. "Rebecca," Victoria said quietly, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "Victoria, I want you to know, I'm sorry. What I did was unforgivable." Rebecca studied the broken woman before her. 6 weeks ago, Victoria had seemed so powerful, so cruel, so untouchable. Now she looked like what she had always been, someone terrified of her own insignificance. "Sorry doesn't undo the damage," Rebecca said quietly, "but it's a start." "A start toward what?" "Toward becoming someone better than you were. The prison sentence you're facing will give you time to think about who you want to be when you get out." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Because cruelty is what started this, and I refuse to let it be what ends it." Rebecca turned to leave, then paused. "Victoria, the next time you see someone you think is vulnerable, remember this moment. Remember that the person you try to destroy might be stronger than you ever imagined." Walking out into the cool night air with her family, Rebecca felt the weight of the evening settling into something like peace. The woman who had been called a creature at a charity auction had become the woman who turned that cruelty into a force for change. Emma stirred in her arms, making soft baby sounds. "What do you think, little one?" Rebecca whispered. "Ready to change the world?" As if in answer, Emma opened her eyes for just a moment, looking up at her mother with the unfocused gaze of the very young. But in that brief connection, Rebecca saw something that filled her with hope. She saw the future. 3 months after the gala, Rebecca's life had settled into a rhythm she never could have imagined. The nursery in their modest apartment had been expanded when they moved to a larger home, but she had insisted on keeping the same furniture, the same books, the same sense of intimate warmth that had defined their early life together. Emma lay in her crib, cooing softly at the mobile David had made by hand. At 3 months old, she was already showing signs of her mother's strong will and her father's gentle nature. Rebecca sat in the rocking chair beside the crib, Luna at her feet, reading the latest reports from the Sterling Foundation. "The Parker family wants to name their new accessibility ramp after you," David said from the doorway, where he'd been watching his wife and daughter with quiet contentment. "Absolutely not," Rebecca replied immediately. "The whole point is that this isn't about me." Try telling that to the 7 families who've gotten life-changing technology this month. Rebecca set aside the Braille report and reached into the crib to stroke Emma's cheek. The baby gurgled happily and grabbed her mother's finger with surprising strength. "She's got your grip," David observed, settling into the chair beside them. "Poor thing, she'll probably be as stubborn as her mother." "God help us all," David said with mock terror. Rebecca laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in the months since the gala. The weight of responsibility for Sterling Technologies was enormous, but it was balanced by the joy of work that mattered and a family that grounded her. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, moving carefully with the walker he now needed. The cancer was winning, but he fought it with the same determination he'd once brought to building his business empire. "May I come in?" he asked, as he always did. "Of course," Emma's face lit up when she heard her grandfather's voice. At 3 months old, she couldn't see him clearly, but she had learned to associate his gentle tone with safety and affection. "How's my granddaughter today?" Eleanor asked, carefully settling into the third chair David had placed in the room. "She slept through the night for the first time," Rebecca reported. "I actually got 6 consecutive hours of sleep." "A miracle," Eleanor said with a smile. "Your mother used to say that exhaustion was nature's way of preparing his parents for the teenage years." It was the first time Eleanor had mentioned Rebecca's mother in months. These casual references to Margaret had become more frequent as he grew sicker, as though he was trying to give Rebecca the family history he had denied her for so long. "Tell me about her," Rebecca said quietly. "Your mother?" "Yes, what was she like when I was Emma's age?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, his breathing labored but steady. "She was fierce, protective. She used to read to you every night, even when you were too young to understand the words. She said babies needed to hear language, needed to know they were loved through story." Rebecca felt Emma's tiny hand close around her finger more tightly. She would have been so proud of what you've built, Eleanor continued, the foundation, the institute, the work you're doing. She always believed that love in action was the only kind that mattered. Is that why you named the children's fund after Ryan? Partly, but mostly because she would have adopted every disabled child who needed a home if I'd let her. She had room in her heart for everyone. Rebecca was quiet, absorbing this glimpse of the mother she barely remembered. I wish Emma could have known her, she said finally. She will, Eleanor replied. Through the stories we tell, through the foundation that bears her name, through the way you love your daughter. A soft knock interrupted the moment. Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding a large envelope. Sorry to interrupt family time, she said, but this just arrived by courier from the Department of Justice. Rebecca's heart rate spiked. Is it about Victoria and Marcus? Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. The sentencing is final. Rebecca took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she broke the seal. David read the contents aloud while she held Emma close. Victoria Chase has been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy and discrimination. Marcus Wellington received 2 years. David continued reading. Wellington Industries' assets will be fully liquidated, with proceeds going to disability advocacy organizations as previously ordered. Both defendants are also required to complete 500 hours of community service, specifically with disability advocacy groups, upon their release. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing the news. How do you feel? Sarah asked gently. Empty, Rebecca said, surprising herself with the honesty. I thought I'd feel satisfied or vindicated or something. Instead, I just feel empty. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. That's because justice isn't about punishment, Rebecca. It's about balance. The scales are balanced now. But those people's lives are destroyed. They destroyed their own lives when they chose cruelty, David said firmly. You just made sure there were consequences. Emma began to fuss, and Rebecca automatically began the gentle, rocking motion that always soothed her daughter. The baby settled almost immediately, finding comfort in her mother's familiar rhythm. There's something else in the envelope, Sarah said hesitantly. What? A letter from Victoria. Rebecca's hands stilled on the rocking chair arms. Read it. Sarah unfolded a single sheet of paper. Dear Rebecca, I know I have no right to write to you, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I've spent every day of the last 3 months thinking about what I did to you. Not because of the legal consequences, but because I finally understand what I took from you. Sarah paused. Should I continue? Rebecca nodded. I took your sense of safety in public spaces. I took your ability to attend events without wondering if someone will attack you. I took your peace of mind during what should have been a joyful time in your pregnancy. I can't give those things back to you, but I can promise that I will spend the rest of my life working to ensure no one else has to experience what I put you through. Rebecca felt tears gathering in her eyes. I start my community service next week with the National Federation of the Blind. I asked specifically to work with newly blinded individuals because I want to understand what I clearly didn't before, that disability doesn't make someone less than human. It makes them human in a different way, and that difference deserves respect, not ridicule. Sarah's voice grew softer as she continued. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that your response to my cruelty taught me something I should have learned long ago. Strength isn't about having power over others. It's about using whatever power you have to lift others up. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. Victoria. The room fell silent except for Emma's soft breathing and the steady tick of the nursery clock. She's trying, Eleanor said quietly. Trying isn't enough, Rebecca replied, but her voice lacked conviction. No, Eleanor agreed, but it's something, more than I did for 22 years. Rebecca looked toward her father's voice. You were grieving. She was calculating. Does the motivation matter if the harm is the same? Rebecca considered this. Emma stirred in her arms, and she automatically began the gentle, bouncing motion that the baby loved. I suppose what matters is what comes after, she said finally. What you build from the wreckage. Her phone buzzed with a text from James Whitmore. Stanford Law Review wants to interview you about the legal precedent your case is set for disability discrimination in corporate settings. Interested? Rebecca showed the message to David, who read it aloud. Another interview, Sarah said. You're becoming quite the spokesperson. I never wanted to be a spokesperson, Rebecca said. I just wanted justice. Sometimes those are the same thing, Eleanor said. Emma began to fuss again, this time more insistently. Rebecca recognized the hunger cry and prepared to nurse her daughter, but paused when she heard a familiar sound from outside. Is that? The news van, David confirmed, looking out the window. Third one this week, Rebecca sighed. The media attention had been helpful for raising awareness about disability rights, but it also meant their private life was increasingly public. Maybe it's time to move, she said. Where would we go? I don't know. Somewhere Emma can grow up normally. Somewhere she's not constantly photographed as the sterling technologies heiress. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. There's a house, he said finally. What kind of house? Your mother's childhood home, in Vermont. I've maintained it all these years, though I'm not sure why. He paused. It has land, privacy, room for Emma to run and play without cameras following her. Rebecca felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Why didn't you mention it before? Because I wasn't sure I had the right to offer it. It's part of your inheritance anyway, but I thought you might want to make it a home instead of just another asset. The idea was tempting, a place where Emma could grow up away from the spotlight, where Rebecca could run Sterling Technologies remotely while maintaining some semblance of a normal family life. What's it like? She asked. Quiet. There's a garden your mother loved, a stream running through the property. The nearest neighbor is half a mile away. Eleanor's voice grew softer. She always said it was the kind of place where children could grow up old and free and safe. Emma had settled into nursing, her tiny hand resting against Rebecca's chest. The baby's contentment was infectious, and Rebecca felt some of her tension ease. I want to see it, she said finally. When? Soon, before you... She couldn't finish the sentence. Before I die, Eleanor said gently. It's okay to say it, Rebecca. We both know I'm running out of time. How much time? Weeks, probably. Maybe a month or two if I'm lucky. Rebecca felt a stab of something unexpected, grief. Not for the father who had abandoned her, but for the grandfather Emma was about to lose, the man who had finally learned how to love without conditions. I want Emma to remember you, she said quietly. She won't. She's too young. Then we'll make sure she knows about you, about who you became, not just who you were. Eleanor's breathing grew more labored, and David immediately moved to help him with his oxygen tank. Thank you, Eleanor said once he could breathe more easily, for letting me be part of her life, for giving me the chance to be a better grandfather than I was a father. You earned it. As the afternoon wore on and Emma settled into her nap, Rebecca found herself thinking about the Vermont house, about the possibility of raising her daughter away from the constant scrutiny that came with being the Sterling heiress. But she also thought about the work still to be done. The foundation was thriving, but there were millions of disabled people who still faced discrimination, still struggled to access basic services, still fought for dignity in a world that often saw them as burdens. What if we split time? She said suddenly. What do you mean? David asked. Vermont for weekends and summers, here for the work week. Emma gets privacy to grow up, but I can still run the foundation and the company. That's a lot of traveling. It's worth it if it means she has a normal childhood. Sarah, who had been quietly organizing baby supplies, looked up. Define normal for the daughter of a billionaire philanthropist who inherited a tech empire after her mother was publicly humiliated at a charity auction. Rebecca laughed despite herself. Fair point. Maybe normal is overrated. Maybe normal is whatever you make it, Eleanor said. Your mother used to say that family isn't about the circumstances you are born into. It's about the love you choose to give. Emma stirred in her sleep, making the soft baby sounds that never failed to melt Rebecca's heart. 3 months old, and already the center of a universe that included a reformed billionaire grandfather, a devoted teacher father, a loyal best friend, and a mother who had learned to turn pain into power. She's going to be extraordinary, Rebecca said, watching her daughter sleep. She already is, David replied. Look at what she's accomplished in 3 months. What has she accomplished? She turned a woman bent on revenge into a woman focused on justice. She gave a dying man the chance to be a grandfather. She brought us all together in ways we never expected. Rebecca considered this. Emma had indeed been the catalyst for so much change, not through anything she had done, but simply through the love she had inspired and the future she represented. You know what I want for her? Rebecca said. What? I want her to grow up knowing that she's enough, exactly as she is. I want her to never doubt her worth because of how others see her. I want her to understand that power is a responsibility, not a privilege. And if she inherits your blindness, Rebecca smiled, then she'll learn that there are many ways to see the world, and that sometimes the most important things are invisible anyway. As evening settled over the city and Luna padded back to her favorite spot by the crib, Rebecca felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with victory or defeat. Victoria Chase was in prison, but that wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was this: a sleeping baby, a loving husband, a father learning to make amends, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to build something better. The woman who had been called a creature at a charity auction had become a mother, a CEO, and a force for change. But most importantly, she had become exactly who she was meant to be. Emma Sterling Brooks would grow up in a world where her mother had already fought the battles that mattered most. She would inherit power, yes, but she would also inherit the wisdom to use it well. And that, Rebecca thought it as she watched her daughter sleep, was the greatest justice of all. 1 year later, the Vermont house had become everything Eleanor had promised and more. Rebecca sat on the wraparound porch, Emma toddling around the garden under David's watchful eye, Luna trailing behind the adventurous 15-month-old with patient devotion. The morning air carried the scent of her mother's roses, which Rebecca had learned to tend with help from the local gardening society. The irony wasn't lost on her farm. The daughter who had never known her mother was now nurturing the flowers Margaret had planted decades ago. "Mama," Emma called out, her vocabulary expanding daily. She had taken her first steps in this garden, spoken her first words in the sunroom where Rebecca now worked remotely, managing Sterling Technologies and the foundation from the peaceful sanctuary Eleanor had preserved. Eleanor himself was buried in the small cemetery at the edge of the property, beside Margaret. He had died peacefully 3 months ago, surrounded by family, a word Rebecca was still learning to apply to their unconventional unit. His last words had been for Emma. "Tell her she made me remember how to love." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a call from James Whitmore. "Good morning, James. Please tell me there's no crisis that requires my immediate attention." "Quite the opposite," the attorney said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "I have news that I think you'll find interesting." "What kind of news?" "Victoria Chase was released from prison yesterday." Rebecca felt a familiar tightness in her chest, but it wasn't fear this time. It was curiosity. And she started a nonprofit organization, teaching disability awareness to corporate executives. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Is it legitimate? Very. She's already contracted with 3 Fortune 500 companies. Her programs are getting rave reviews from disability advocacy groups. Interesting. There's more. She's requested a meeting with you. Rebecca watched Emma chase a butterfly through the garden, David close behind to catch her if she stumbled. The scene was so perfectly normal, so beautifully ordinary that it felt almost sacred. What does she want? To apologize in person and to propose a collaboration. What kind of collaboration? She wants the Sterling Foundation to certify her training programs. She believes having your endorsement would legitimize her work with companies that are skeptical of her motives. Rebecca considered this carefully. Victoria Chase, the woman who had called her a creature, was now dedicating her life to disability advocacy. It felt like poetic justice, but Rebecca had learned to be wary of things that felt too neat. "What do you think?" she asked James. "I think people can change. I also think you shouldn't meet with her unless you want to, regardless of the potential benefits to the foundation." After ending the call, Rebecca sat in the rocking chair Eleanor had bought for the porch. Emma had discovered a small frog and was attempting to have a conversation with it, her toddler babble earnest and animated. "Frog! Frog, hi! David scooped her up before she could grab the amphibian. Gentle with the frog, sweetheart. He's smaller than you. Gentle, Emma repeated solemnly, then immediately tried to reach for the frog again. She's definitely your daughter, David called to Rebecca, completely fearless and absolutely stubborn. Rebecca smiled. Those aren't necessarily bad qualities. David carried Emma up to the porch, settling beside Rebecca on the swing they'd installed last month. Emma immediately reached for her mother, and Rebecca pulled her daughter onto her lap. James called, Rebecca said. Victoria Chase wants to meet. When David was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? Confused, curious, maybe a little proud. Proud? She's doing the work now. Really doing it. Not because she was forced to, but because she chooses to. Does that change what she did to you? Rebecca considered this. No, but it might change what her future looks like. Emma had discovered the buttons on Rebecca's sweater and was methodically trying to eat each one. No, baby, Rebecca said gently, redirecting Emma's attention to a soft toy. Buttons aren't food. Food, Emma said enthusiastically, clapping her hands. Yes, we'll get you food in a minute. As Rebecca prepared Emma's lunch in the kitchen, they'd modernize with accessibility features. She thought about the meeting request. The woman who had tried to destroy her was now asking for her help to build something positive. It felt like the final movement of a symphony that had begun with cruelty and discord, but was resolving into something unexpectedly harmonious. I want to meet with her, Rebecca said suddenly. David looked up from where he was wiping Emma's high chair. Are you sure? I think so, but not here. This is our sanctuary, and not at Sterling Technologies. That's about power. Somewhere neutral. Where? Rebecca smiled. The community center where we held that first meeting, where this all really began. 3 days later, Rebecca sat in the same meeting room where she had first announced her identity as a Sterling heir. Victoria Chase sat across from her, looking smaller and older than Rebecca remembered. The hard edges that had defined her at the auction were gone, replaced by something that looked like humility. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Victoria said quietly. I wasn't sure I would. I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd refused. Rebecca studied the woman across from her. Victoria's posture was different, her voice softer. Prison had changed her, but something else had too. Tell me about your work, Rebecca said. Victoria straightened slightly. I teach corporate executives what I should have learned years ago, that disabled employees aren't charity cases or inspiration porn. They're people with skills and perspectives that make companies stronger. And they listen to you? Some do, others think I'm trying to score points for good behavior. Victoria paused. They're not entirely wrong. This started as court-ordered community service. But somewhere along the way it became real. I started understanding what I'd been blind to my whole life. Rebecca waited for her to continue. I met a woman named Sarah during my service with the National Federation of the Blind. She lost her sight in a car accident 5 years ago. She was struggling to adapt, convinced her life was over. Rebecca felt a flicker of recognition. What happened? I was supposed to help her learn to use assistive technology. But she ended up teaching me what blindness actually means, not helplessness or tragedy, just a different way of navigating the world. Victoria's voice grew stronger as she spoke. She's a software engineer now, one of the best in her company. She taught me that the barriers aren't in people's disabilities. They're in other people's assumptions about those disabilities. So you decided to change the assumptions. I decided to try. I know I can't undo what I did to you, but maybe I can prevent it from happening to someone else. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Why do you want the Sterling Foundation's endorsement? She asked finally. Because companies trust you. When you speak about disability issues, people listen. When I speak, they wonder about my motives. And what are your motives? Victoria met Rebecca's gaze directly. To become someone better than I was. To make my daughter proud when she's old enough to understand what I did. Your daughter? Emma. She's 6 months old now. Rebecca felt a jolt of surprise. Emma. I named her after your daughter. I hope that's not presumptuous. I wanted her to have a name that reminded me every day of the person I want to be. The conversation continued for another hour, covering Victoria's curriculum, her success rates, the companies she'd worked with. But Rebecca's mind kept returning to that revelation. Victoria had named her daughter after Emma. After Victoria left, Rebecca sat alone in the meeting room, thinking about forgiveness and redemption, and the strange ways that cruelty could transform into compassion. Her phone rang, Sarah's number. "How did it go?" Sarah asked immediately. "She's changed, really changed." "Do you believe her?" "I think so. She's named her daughter Emma." "After your Emma?" "Yes." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That's either deeply meaningful or deeply creepy." Rebecca laughed despite herself. "I'm going with meaningful." "So you'll endorse her programs?" "I'm going to do something better. I'm going to fund them." 2 weeks later, Rebecca announced the Victoria Chase Rehabilitation Initiative, a Sterling Foundation program that would train formerly incarcerated individuals to become disability advocates. Victoria would lead the program, but it would operate under the foundation's oversight. The announcement generated considerable media attention, with opinions ranging from praise for Rebecca's forgiveness to criticism for trusting someone who had betrayed her so cruelly. Rebecca didn't care about the opinions. She cared about the results. On a quiet Sunday morning in Vermont, Rebecca sat in the garden with Emma, reading her daughter's favorite book. Emma couldn't understand the words yet, but she loved the rhythm of her mother's voice and the feel of turning pages. "Once upon a time," Rebecca read, "there was a little girl who was different from everyone else in her village." Emma grabbed at the book's textured pages, designed for children who learn through touch rather than sight. The other villagers thought she was strange because she saw the world differently than they did. But the little girl knew something they didn't understand. Luna lay nearby, ever watchful, as David worked in the vegetable garden they'd planted together. She knew that different wasn't wrong. Different was just different. And sometimes being different was exactly what the world needed. Emma clapped her hands, delighted by the story she'd heard dozens of times but never tired of. "The end," Rebecca said, closing the book. "More," Emma demanded, her newest and most frequently used word. "More stories later," Rebecca promised. "Right now, let's go see what Daddy is growing in the garden." As they walked through the rows of vegetables, Emma toddling between her parents with Luna as her escort, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From humiliation to empowerment, from victim to victor, from isolation to family. The woman who had been called a creature at a charity auction was now raising a daughter who would grow up knowing that love was stronger than cruelty, that dignity was not negotiable, and that sometimes the greatest victories came not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them become better people. Emma Sterling Brooks would inherit billions of dollars and a technology empire. But more importantly, she would inherit the knowledge that power without compassion was meaningless, that strength without kindness was weakness, and that the best revenge was a life lived so well that your enemies became inspired to improve themselves. As the sun set over the Vermont hills and Emma fell asleep in her mother's arms, Rebecca felt the deep satisfaction that came from work well done and love freely given. The creature had become a creator. The victim had become a victor. The abandoned child had become a woman who would never abandon anyone else. And that, Rebecca knew, was how real transformation happened. Not through punishment or revenge, but through the persistent application of love in the face of hatred, dignity in the face of cruelty, and hope in the face of despair. Emma stirred in her sleep, and Rebecca hummed softly, a lullaby her own mother had once sung. The melody carried on the evening breeze, weaving through the garden where 3 generations of Sterling women had found peace, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that they were exactly who they were meant to be. The story that had begun with cruelty had ended with grace, and in the morning they would begin writing the next chapter together. If Rebecca's journey from victim to victor inspired you, if her transformation from humiliation to empowerment moved you, show some love by hitting that like button. Your support helps stories like this reach people who need to hear them most. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated because of who you are? How did you turn that challenge into strength? I read every single comment, and your stories inspire the next videos I create. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs to remember their own power. Sometimes we all need a reminder that our greatest defeats can become our most powerful victories. And if you're ready for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about underdogs who refuse to stay down, about the kind of justice that changes everything, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because next week, I'm bringing you another story that will remind you just how strong you really are. Until then, remember, you are not what happens to you. You are what you choose to do about it. See you in the next story.